Welcome to Glazing with Amico. I'm Kara, and at the moment, I want to check to see that we are live. David, um, let me see. Does not look like it is. David, are we live yet?
Okay, I just clicked on it, and you're live.
Okay, great. That's great. I'm so glad. So, welcome to Glazing with Amico. Sorry, having a little technical difficulty this morning. And today I'm going to be talking about uh, my best recommendations for PC10 Junebug and PC11 Blue Spark. But before I get started, I wanted to show you all. Last week I did some glazing, not last week, 2 weeks ago, I did glazing with flambe. And this is the vase that I glazed. So this was fired to cone 6, and it was 3 very generous coats of PC71 flambe and 1 thin coat of HF9 zinc-free clear, and you can see it's just a really, really rich purple color. Let me see if I can do the overhead zoom, and you can see that beautiful, beautiful purple. Just a gorgeous, gorgeous glaze. So that came out of the kiln last week, and I was really excited. So I did talk about how flambe will break clear on the edges. You can see here how it's clear along the edge, and it shows that white clay body. But I wanted to show you what it looks like on a textured surface, and this was the same 3 coats of flambe, and it ran quite a lot because it held a lot more glaze in the texture. So this had a really deeply carved texture, but you can see how it really highlighted that. Let me go back to the zoom, and you can see, isn't that beautiful? So you can see how it really broke across all that texture, and it was really lovely, but it also ran quite a lot, and I need to grind this down and grind this down. So in the future, if I were doing this, I would probably leave the bottom like ½ inch unglazed because uh, that's not really what I'm going for. This had a wide foot. I thought that would slow it down enough, but it didn't slow it down quite enough. This was fired to cone 6, and the inside and top are just the C1 obsidian. But again, it just highlights that texture very beautifully. But it is a beautiful glaze all by itself on a smooth surface. So I wanted to share that with you. In 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about berry bowls and how to glaze things that have holes in them so that the holes do not seal up. I don't know if you can see that this does have holes in it, but it does. And this is also obsidian with a coat of smoky merlot. So it is hard to see. I'm going to do another one that's lighter so you'll see more of it. But it's nice to be able to do berry bowls or things that have holes in them and not worry about the holes glazing shut. So I'll talk about those things in 2 weeks. But today I wanted to show you all some of the tests that I've done with Junebug and Blue Spark. So about a month ago, I talked about vintage gold, and I've done a lot of testing with vintage gold and with Blue Spark and Junebug. All 3 of these glazes came out last year about the same time. I'm sorry, 2 years ago, about the same time, and they're all 3 really, really spectacular glazes, but they are very particular about how they get applied and fired, their clay body. So they can be very frustrating if you're not using them just so. But let's see here. Let me go to the overhead. You can see that it has a really iridescent sheen. This is Junebug, and this one did not develop a lot of crystals, but it does have a very iridescent sheen, just like the shell of a beetle. Really quite an unusual glaze. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with using Junebug and Blue Spark is that they are not glazes that layer well. They do best by themselves. If you layer them, as you can see on the edge here, they just will go blue where they meet. This was not layered, it was just where the clear met the Junebug right along that edge. It turned a beautiful cobalt blue, but you're going to lose all of the iridescence, you're going to lose the metallics that really make Junebug and Blue Spark so interesting. So do not use them for layering unless you're wanting that cobalt blue, but there's much easier ways to get that. So by themselves. Now the first thing, I'm going to talk first about Junebug and then I'll talk about Blue Spark. Do we have any questions before I get any farther? Has anybody used Junebug or Blue Spark? And if you have, I'd love to see your samples in the comments. And I won't be able to see them right this moment, but I'll see them afterwards. But I'd love for you to share whether they were good or bad. So these are they're very small. Let me go back to the zoom and you can see them a little bit more clearly. So this is one coat, two coats, three coats, cone 5 and cone 6. And at cone 5, there are some small crystals forming. Even in one coat, you get the iridescent quality. At cone 6, with one coat at cone 6, it's just a flat green. It's very glossy, but it's not until you get a heavier application, 2 coats, that it starts to make these beautiful rainbow crystals. I know it's hard to see in a video, but at cone 6 it starts to develop iridescent crystals. At cone 5 over here, it's a little bit easier to see them, but it's more iridescent, smaller crystals. Cone 6, bigger crystals, but less iridescence. Again, they do need to be applied pretty thick. And when I say 3 coats, my 3 coats are more like, so for some people, they're a lot more than 3 coats. So number 1, I use these thick, beautiful fan brushes. And hi, Evelyn. These are natural fiber fan brushes, and they're thick and fluffy, and they hold a lot of glaze. So if you're using an artificial fiber or a very stiff fiber, it's not going to give you the same kind of results. Hang on a moment. Get this open. Oh my gosh, I have a new jar. I haven't had a new jar of glaze in so long. With all the shortages, it's been difficult sometimes. So, pardon me, I'm going to change my screen back so I can see what I'm doing. And you can see that I really float the glaze on. It's not really brushing so much as floating glaze on. This is not like paint. I liken it more to like frosting something. You should not be scraping your brush across the surface of the wear. It should be just spreading that glaze on. So application makes a big difference. And this, as you see, I am overlapping. This is one coat. And then I'll let it dry. And when it's dry, I will apply a second coat just like this. So sometimes people are like, well, you know, if you're going back and forth, that's more coats. Well, no, I don't count that. So I already poured glaze on the inside of this earlier, so I don't have to worry about glazing the inside. And I'll just scoot that over. And while that is while that is drying, I will go on to the next thing. So I have, this is application, cone 5, cone 6, 1 coat, 2 coat, 3 coat. Place that over there. And next, the next thing that I tested was firing schedule. So most of my firings had been on a normal, this is a normal cone. Oh, I'm sorry. That is, these two were fired to cone 5 with a 20-minute hold, so it bent cone 6. So it was a cone 6 firing, but very, very slow. This one had a hold and then a drop hold and a slow cool, and it came out more matte. So if you're doing a drop hold and a slow cool and you're firing, any kind of slow cooling, it's going to start coming out matte and it's just green. There's no iridescence to it. It's just a green and interesting, but you're not going to get the crystals. So not slow cool is not something I'd recommend. And the very, very slow firing actually gave us more iridescence, but not as much in the way of crystal growth. Do we have a question, David?
Yeah, we have a couple questions, and Luann wanted to say hi and thank you.
Hi, Luann. Thank you.
Michelle was curious if you shook the jar before we started filming.
I did.
And,
although this glaze does not really settle because of the gum solution that we use, the glazes don't tend to settle very often, but we do recommend shaking it. But I didn't shake it right before. I shook it before when I brought the glaze in.
We just kind of walk around shaking jars.
Yeah, we do. We just walk around the studio, shake a jar or two. I'm very frequently shaking jars because it tells me if the glaze is still liquid.
And Diane had a kind of a question in the same vein. Do we need to stir and or shake between each coat?
Um,
Which you kind of already answered that.
Yeah, I would at least stir, but we don't find that these. I don't find that most of the glazes settle that quickly, so it's okay to just let them sit. I don't generally shake them between coats, but that's because I leave the jar open between coats. So once that one coat is dry, I'll put the next one on. If I'm going to step away from my jar for a few minutes, I'll put the lid on so that it, just like that, so that it doesn't dry out too much. Although our studio does not generally, nothing really dries out in it. So the next thing that I did, sorry, I'm checking my samples here. The next thing I did was trying out some different bisque temperatures. And some people, oh, one of my lights just went out. Some people bisque, I don't think it's going to make too much difference. So some people bisque at lower temperatures, some people bisque at higher. Generally, we bisque at cone 04. So it's a little bit higher than some, but it was suggested to me that we bisque at cone 010, very, very, very low. And someone else suggested bisquing at cone 6, so very, very, very high. And weirdly, the results were not very different for cone 6 versus cone 010 bisque. So let me see if I can show you the overhead zoom. So this was the very low bisque, this was the very high bisque, and they came out looking about the same. Very odd. What I did notice in all of my testing, and these were fired to cone 6, and this was the cone 6 bisque, and this was the 010, and the temperature of the firing made more difference than the temperature of the bisque. So bisque temperature, you can do different things. I know that bisque temperature made a difference with Vintage Gold, but not so much with Junebug. I tried some different liner glazes because the Celadons they get very dry where they touch the Junebug, Vintage Gold, or Blue Spark. The Celadons will get very dry, so I don't really recommend them as a liner glaze. What I found worked best was HF9, but I also used PC24, and I can say that the PCs, at least some of them, seem to work quite well as liners with Junebug. So I'm going to put one more coat on here. Do we have another question, David?
Sure do. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the name right, Jolie or Joel, wants to know about our firing schedule and if we're using the schedule on the controller. I guess he means cone fire.
Yes. Yeah, we generally, most of our firings are
Did you catch that about the focus?
No, I didn't, and I have been trying to work on the focus, and I cannot get this camera to focus any better than this. So I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. We generally fire everything unless I specify a firing schedule. We fire all of our pieces on the cone fire medium speed to a specific cone. I only put a hold on if there's an issue, if the kiln is known to have difficulty. So I'm firing to make sure that the cone drops exactly the way that I want it to. And here, go back to so I can see you guys, or you can see me. So I fire everything on a medium speed to a specific cone, no hold, no or a very, very short hold, just to make sure that the cone bends the way I want it to. We don't do any slow cools. We don't do any fancy programs. It's just medium speed. So if I'm finding that the witness cone is not bending the way I want it to, if it's not bent, I might put on a hold. But generally our kilns are pretty accurate, and I don't need to put a hold on at all. So just medium speed, and there it goes. So when I did some different firings, I will say if it's a different firing. So if it's cone 5, it's medium speed cone 5. If it's cone 6, it's medium speed cone 6. Unless I said that I went to cone 5 and then did a 20-minute hold to bend cone 6, that was a special firing. Otherwise, we don't do special firings. Everything is just very straightforward. Does that help? I do hope so. It's I know a lot of people like to do different kinds of schedules, and some kilns some glazes like having different firing schedules, and some don't. So I'm going to go back to tiles. Oh, we have another question?
We have quite a few questions.
Good. Let me hear them, because I can't see them.
So, looks like it's Rorschach.
Mm-hmm.
was wondering if we have a video on copper red, and the answer is yes.
Yes, we do. It's a little bit older. I think I did it back in December. But if you look at the pinned or featured posts on the 5-6 group, it should be in there. I don't know if it's on YouTube, so but I can post a link to it. Yes, we do have video for copper reds. There's also a troubleshooting guide on our website. Go to amicobrent.com and you will see some information on different troubleshooting guides on that site. And we have specifically a guide for copper red. There's also one for flambe. The troubleshooting for both of them is very, very similar because the glazes are very similar. I'm going to move on to bodies next. Any other questions?
There was a question about the clay body, 11M.
Mm-hmm.
They wanting to know what we're using earlier.
That is what we use, is 11M for most of our tests. But I do have some samples for different clay bodies, which I'm going to get into next, unless we have another question.
Yep, and I think you covered this a little bit earlier, but Rose was saying that she loves Junebug, but it often gets really big rough crystals, especially when 3+ coats. Have you experienced that, and is there a way to avoid it?
I haven't seen rough crystals, but I have seen blistering. And sometimes, if it goes too thick, yes, it will blister. But it can also be the clay body. So when we were doing clay body tests, I found that some clay bodies did better than others. Laguna's B-Mix did really well, while Little Loafers was not quite as good. We have Laguna's WC609 did really well. This is Coleman porcelain, and it came out spectacularly. I think you can see those crystals. And we actually got some good results with Standards 182, Aardvark's Nara 5, and Frost porcelain. And they all had different characteristics, but they all came out pretty well. And our 480 was not too bad, but I felt like clays that had more impurities, especially iron-bearing clay bodies, did tend to blister a little bit more. And I did notice more blistering with different liner glazes. So when I was using HF9 as a liner, I found less blistering. So it can make a difference what glaze you're using on the inside as a liner. So I recommend testing, but if you don't want to test, HF9 seems to be a really solid liner glaze. And so your clay body can make a difference, your liner glaze can make a difference. It's a very finicky glaze. It likes to be just so. But we had good results with white or porcelain clay bodies, and a couple of speckled clay bodies. Do we have other questions?
Yeah, we have 2 clarification questions and 1 brushing question. I'll start with the brushing question. Michelle was wondering why you go over the same spot when you are applying your layers.
Well, these, I don't think of these as layers because it's all one glaze, but they're coats. And when I'm putting on one coat, I do go over an area to get it as smooth as possible and to make sure that I got a good application.
And Tide of Time wanted to clarify about the fire schedule. He said you had it hold for 20 minutes, unlike how you normally don't hold it or only do a short hold.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That was one of my different firing schedules. But normally, I find that it works just fine on a normal, Junebug works just fine on a normal schedule. Just fire right up to cone 6 and turn it off.
I think the big thing is we're aiming to bend that cone just right.
Yep.
Depending on what, all kilns run a little bit differently maybe.
Yes, that is true. They do. A lot of kilns do fire a little differently, especially if they're getting older. And so you got to get to know your kiln and use a witness cone and make sure that it's firing accurately so that you're not, well, I think it's going to cone 5 because it might not be. And some glazes melt early, so it may be that some of your glazes look fine if they're fired to cone 4 and other glazes do not. So you do have to kind of get to know your kiln.
It looks like Livy might have a misunderstanding about what a liner is. She asked, do you always use a liner? Is this just a layer under the Junebug?
No, it is not underneath the Junebug. It is inside the vase. So I already glazed the inside of the vase so that I don't have to worry about glazing the inside for this demo. I glazed the inside. It's already done. It's dry. And then I'm just going to glaze the outside. So I did that on my flambe vase when I did the video for flambe. I had already poured HF9 clear glaze on the inside, so then when I did the glaze demo, I didn't have to worry about glazing the inside, just the outside. And sometimes I'll do liner glazes because I just want to use the glaze as an accent. Sometimes I just want to use the glaze as an accent. I didn't want to do the entire piece with the flambe. I just wanted it right on the texture. But sometimes if it's not a food safe glaze and I'm putting it on something that could be used for food, I'll do a liner glaze just to have a food safe lining. The other reason is like with the flambe vase. Flambe is an expensive glaze. It has to be on really, really, really thick. So instead of using a fancy glaze on the inside, I just use a clear on the inside because no one's going to see it. And it seems like kind of a waste to use my fancy glaze on the inside when I could just use a clear glaze. Does that help? So,
yeah, we'll see.
Do we have another?
Does Obsidian Celadon make a decent liner glaze? I didn't know glazes can impact the finished results of the outside.
So Obsidian generally makes a good liner glaze, but my testing found that the Celadons, including Obsidian, anything from the Celadon line, didn't work out, as well as a liner glaze for Junebug or Blue Spark or Vintage Gold. So that's why I went to HF9 Zinc Free Clear and found that that made a really good liner glaze. It doesn't affect the outside glaze the same way that the Celadon did, and where they meet doesn't get rough, and that was something that I was looking for, because where the Celadons, let's see, where is my Celadon sample? You can't really see it on this sample, but on some of the samples that I glazed, it actually got wrinkly. The Celadon wrinkled where it met the metallic glaze. So that was very strange. So that was one of the signs that those two glaze families don't interact all that well together. So I'm going to move on to Blue Spark. This is going to, just move that over there. And I will show you all my Blue Spark tiles. These are a little more difficult to see because Blue Spark is a lot darker. But just like with Junebug, Blue Spark likes to be thicker, and if you apply it too thin, it will not get the sparks. But Blue Spark is a blue glaze that makes silvery crystals. So it's not iridescent the same way that Junebug is. The specks are kind of like silvery. Now this is an example of two different bisques, and in this case the Cone 6 bisque, it did pinhole quite a lot. But the Cone 010 bisque did not. So while the bisque didn't seem to make much difference for Junebug, it did make a difference for Blue Spark. So if you're having trouble, you can try lowering your bisque temperature. I would say you probably don't need to go as low as 010 bisque, but maybe 08 bisque. But it came out really beautiful and very smooth. In the video, it may look just blue. I'm not sure if you're getting the sparks. As I said before, I'm having trouble with focusing. There's just no way it wants to focus that close.
That was super helpful for Jason. He ran into the same problems, and that's why he was asking. So.
Okay. So this was fired to Cone 6, and that was another thing, is that I found that Blue Spark does best at Cone 6, and it really liked that long hold. So Blue Spark loves being fired to Cone 5 with a 20-minute hold. That's how this was fired. And it made even more little metallic sparks and no blistering. Now, one thing that I will say about both Blue Spark and Junebug, and this also applies to several other glazes, including Ancient Copper and Vintage Gold, these like a lot of space in the kiln. They don't like to be too crowded. So this is Blue Spark at Cone 5, and it gave me some, they're not really blisters, they're almost like lumps. It's like the crystals clumped up, and there's not blisters, but it's lumpy. It's a very odd sort of thing, but this was Cone 5. I know, I'm just throwing out all these tiles out. It's probably like overload. So this was low bisque, but Cone 5, and you can see how it was lumpy, but then it smoothed out when I fired it to Cone 6. Different liner glazes, just the same kind of issues with liner glazes as I had with Junebug. This was a slow cool, so in this we had a slow heating, in this we had a slow cool, and it's more black, but there are metallic crystals. In fact, that's where the black is coming from. It's an almost mirror-like surface because of the black crystals growing. So the things that Junebug likes, Blue Spark doesn't always go exactly the same way. Liner glaze was not quite as important, but clay body did make a difference, and like Vintage Gold, Blue Spark likes clay bodies that are not vitreous. So it didn't do well on clay bodies that are Cone 5 clay bodies. It did not care for brown clay bodies. It liked high fire clay bodies. Like, for example, this is Coleman porcelain. It did quite well on Coleman porcelain.
We had a request for little loafers. Do we happen to have?
Yes, here we go. This is Little Loafers. And it did have some small, again, they're not blisters, they're like lumps. But I think if you fired it to Cone 6, it would be just fine, especially if you did the Cone 5 with a 20-minute hold. So there's the Little Loafers. It's more black, but it actually has a little iridescence. So I would say Little Loafers is probably a good bet. Do some low bisque and fire it slow, and I think that it would be great. Just like with Junebug, I don't recommend layering it because it's going to lose all of its metallic qualities. It's just going to turn blue. any kind of layering. It just isn't meant to be a layered glaze. So that is it for my Blue Spark and Junebug. Um, those are all of my samples that I have today. I am going to fire the vase that I did with Junebug, and I'm also going to do another vase with Blue Spark, same kind of glazing. And I'm going to fire it this next week, and I'll share that in 2 weeks. Join me for talking about berry bowls and things with holes and making sure that your holes do not seal up with glaze. Thank you for joining me today. It's been great. Do we have any other questions, David?
Yes. Rorschach asked, Carrie, you mentioned these colors don't do well layering. What about using a flux on the rim?
I wouldn't. I wouldn't use a flux on the rim. You would just get blue, and it wouldn't be metallic at all. If you want blue and runny, I would suggest just using something like cobalt celadon and just putting a flux or oatmeal or honey flux over it. But I don't think that these do well with any kind of layering. They're really meant to be spectacular all by themselves, not for layered. Other questions?
Um, have we used Junebug on any dark clay bodies like Brown Bear?
I have not tried it on any darker clay bodies. The darkest clay body I have here for a sample is standard 112 or standard 306, and it blistered on the 112. So I'm not sure that it would work well. I think that most dark clay bodies, it may blister, but you should give it a try. It might be really lovely, but another option is to use a white clay body and just put a black underglaze on any exposed areas so that you have the contrast of the black matte to the Junebug. So I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for joining me today. I'll see you in 2 weeks, and keep glazing.